story and atmosphere. Difficult choices, action sequences, or inventory management here, and movements limited to progressing through the locations along with the plot.
I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more.
During the game, you will encounter interactive elements. Some of them will allow you to continue your journey. Others reveal interesting facts about the original short story, its historical background, and the author. Some of the trivia is hidden. In order to find these secrets, focus your eyes and look for the Elder Sign. As to letters, my case is peculiar. I write such things exactly as easily and as rapidly as I would utter the same topics in conversation. Indeed, epistolary expression is with me largely replacing conversation as my condition of nervous frustration becomes more and more acute. Okay. You need to discover trivia immediately or go back to them later in the main menu. Turn off explaining trivia. I find that feature to distract from the story. This can be changed. Okay.
Penniless, and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below. Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death. It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider. The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation. So that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners.
Okay.
So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were...
Oh.
When I finally found myself
weather.
adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings. Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude, I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight. The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land.
Water?
But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I slept. Its details for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous.
Oh, what?
When at last I awoke, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see. and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished. For there was in the air and in the rotting soil a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish and of other, less describable things which I saw protruding
What's
from
that?
the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity. There was nothing within hearing and nothing in sight save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet.
I feel like I've seen this before. Dagon seems to be inspired by Fishhead, a short novel by Irvin S. Cobb about unnatural affinities between a hybrid idiot and the strange fish of an isolated island, supernatural horror in literature, H.P. Lovecraft. And Lovecraft's dream about a strange island emerging from the ocean and him crawling in the ooze that covered its surface. I dreamed that whole hideous crawl and yet feel the ooze sucking me down. In defense of Dagon, H.P. Lovecraft. Lovecraft's interest in the topic stemmed from his aversion to fish and sea smells in his own words. I have hated fish and feared the sea and not everything connected with it since I was 2 years old, but I cannot recall what earlier experience gave me such profound and lasting aversion to the sea and seafood. The Dweller in Darkness, Lovecraft 1927, Donald Wandre. Okay.
As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions for which innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths.
I guess that makes sense.
So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things. For several hours I sat thinking or brooding. For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for traveling purposes in a short time. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue.
Can he like walk on these things?
On the third
It looks
morning,
pretty solid,
I found the
look.
soil dry enough to walk upon with
Right,
ease.
see?
The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal. All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert.
It's a whale? Probably.
That night I encamped, and on the following day still travelled toward the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first espied it. fourth evening, I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from it.
There's a whole mountain.
An intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night, but ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again. And in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence.
Yeah, this thing is big.
I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me. But I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost and of Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined. Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent, whilst after a drop of only a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual. Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps, where no light had yet penetrated. All at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite side. An object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon. That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself.
How is a stone that, like, cube-ish?
But I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled. For despite its enormous magnitude, and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith. Whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures.
Maybe.
Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely. The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm,
like symbols,
and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the Cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me and unlike anything I'd ever seen in books.
Who's that?
Consisting for the most. Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world.
It looks like an An
but
octopus.
whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound.
Dagon contains many themes and storytelling methods that Lovecraft developed in his later works, such as telling the story through carvings at the Mountains of Madness, the Nameless City, journals and character notes, the Shadow Out of Time, the Haunter of the Dark, islands emerging from the ocean, the Call of Cthulhu, or fictional beings and deities based on real events and mythologies, Mygo and the Whisperers in Darkness. It's also considered the origin of the popular Cthulhu mythos. Some of Lovecraft's other stories also conclude in a manner similar to Dagon. But let's skip the details in order not to spoil the ending.
Plainly visible across the intervening water on account of their enormous size were an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of a Doré. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men. But the
Mermaid.
creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint, grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer.
Oh, what's that?
They were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seem to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background. For one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale,
Fish.
represented
that's a whale.
as but little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe. Some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then, suddenly,
what
I saw
happened?
it.
What did you see?
With only a slight churning to
Oh.
churning to mark its rise to the
Something's
surface,
happening to the water.
the thing slid into view above the dark waters. Vast, famous-like and loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to vast, Polyphemus-like and loathsome. It darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds.
We're becoming blurry.
I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little.
Back at the mountain thing. He
I
ascended
believe
again.
I sang a great deal and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing.
It's
I
raining.
have indistinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard pearls of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods. When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital,
Oh,
brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, My rescuers knew nothing,
Okay.
nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe. Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist, and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god,
Dagon was the main deity of the Philistines, worshipped throughout the Middle East as the ancient god of fertility and crops. In Hebrew, the word Dagon was a common noun for grain. The rulers of Akkad, Mesopotamia, chose him as the patron saint of their war conquests. He also appeared as the judge of the dead in an Assyrian poem and an underworld prison warder in one of the Babylonian texts. He is often mistakenly taken for a fish god due to the wrong interpretation of his name, as in Hebrew, the word Dag means fish. In H.P. Lovecraft's work, Dagon was an underwater deity ruling over the deep ones, a humanoid race with fish traits that reside in the oceans. He is worshipped by a secret cult called the Historic Order of Dagon. Okay.
But soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries.
August Derleth and the Cthulhu Mythos. August Derleth was an American writer and an anthologist. He also befriended Lovecraft and published many of his works through his company Arkham House. Although he greatly